Hi, welcome to the Is This You podcast. Today I've got a very special guest of mine because I've known this man for over 15 years. It's Roger Longden, who is the founder of There Be Giants, an OKR company, but also Roger was my coach for a number of years. Welcome, Roger.
Hey, Dave. Good to be with you.
What I want to start off with, we've known each other for over 15 years. And a big chunk of that, it was at least a 4 or 5 year period where I was working quite closely with you, with my agency. But naturally, I knew a lot about you professionally, but not necessarily personally. And also, I'm interested to start off on before you founded There Be Giants.
Mm.
What was like the 3 to 5 years before that? Can you tell us a little bit
Yeah,
about that?
there was life before it. Yeah, absolutely. I was in corporate for my sins. I was working for a very large IT infrastructure business, the name of which has become rather toxic since the post office scandal, which I had absolutely nothing to do with, I'd just like to say. Never trust that project in the slightest. Because of the size of Fujitsu, it afforded me the opportunity to cover a whole load of different parts of the organization and do a whole load of different roles. And I over the course of about 14 years, I went from being an order administrator right up to being on a sort of special projects team that reported into the board.
Mm.
And I could see it coming 12 months before it did, but when there was the downturn in 2008, we were getting at that point about 70% of our annual revenues from government contracts, and I knew that there'd be cutbacks. And this was even when it was still Labour as well. You know, the coalition hadn't even come in by this point.
Mm.
So I thought, right, I'm going to get my ducks in a row. So I made sure I signed up for, all the training I could. And we had a really good relationship with Henley Business School because we maintained our own internal cohort of coaches. And to become a member of that cohort, you had to go and do this really fantastic program at Henley that ran for 12 months. It was a postgrad level, and it was a postgrad diploma in performance coaching and so on. And so I was like, yeah, I want to do that. So I got on that, and then of course redundancy came, and I went, yes, please. And because I'd been there for quite a while, I got a decent payout, and that gave me kind of the springboard to try and just start up a coaching business with just me and thee, and that was it. You know, so yeah, the life beforehand, I mean, even further back, I used to work with kids and care, which is a completely different career change. But yeah, my time in Fujitsu, I went through sales, account management, service management, bid management, operations and engineering management. And then because of the turnarounds that I delivered, particularly in the operations space, I brought lean practices and waste elimination into our UK and engineering and logistics facility at Warrington. That's why I was invited to go onto this into this kind of turnaround team, which was about aligning the people and the way that we worked with our people and the way that we trained and developed and our people with the business strategy. So where there were accounts that were really struggling, we went in there and we looked at the skills, we looked at the capabilities, and we looked at what was working and what wasn't working, and came up with solutions to try and turn that around. So it was working not just with the skills, but also very much with the behaviours as well. So you can probably see a bit of continuity from what I was doing then to how I've continued to work since I've been out of corporate and enjoying the freedom of working for oneself.
And you set me in the direction of a couple of, I'd say, big topics, but one early one that really helped me, not just in business, but also in my personal life, was emotional intelligence, which we can come on to in a bit. But the other one was the OKRs.
Yeah.
And as you know, I'm a planner, and that was super helpful. But what's impressive is how you've built like a brand, not just the company, you've built a strong brand around that. You've got like your Microsoft Gold partner, things like that. But where did the OKR thing come from in terms of with There Be Giant?
So I've got to give credit to my old business partner, right?
Yeah.
My former business partner, because I can remember still as clear as day, we were out for coffee one afternoon, and he said to me, what is it that really pisses you off about organizations? And I know exactly what he was trying to do with that question. He was trying to find, where was the energy? Where was almost the anger and the frustration, and which can very easily become passion if you use it correctly. And I said, you know what? It was the way that performance was managed in organizations. It was the way that I used to have to manage performance in Fujitsu. We had a bloody awful process and a bloody awful system, and you'd set objectives at the beginning of the year. They would just get put in a drawer or logged on a system, never get looked at again until the end of the year. And then in the final month, there'd be a mad panic because HR would be saying, why have they not been updated? Why have they not been scored? You'd look at them, they bear no relation to what's actually happened. And you're having to assess people's performance against something which doesn't reflect reality. The whole thing just felt really unfair and massively unfit for business. And I thought, when you strip it back, what this was a mechanism for trying to deploy the and get people to understand and align with the priorities of the business, whether they be local priorities or strategic priorities. But it was, to be perfectly honest, it was crap at doing it. It just wasn't, like I say, it wasn't fit for purpose. So the challenge from my old business partner was, there are some organizations that do this really well, so why don't you go and find out what it is that they're doing that majority aren't? So there ensued about sort of 6 months worth of research, which I remember I decided I was going to write a paper off the back of it, just self-published paper that I just circulated on LinkedIn. And this paper got picked up by a software company in Seattle, not Microsoft, before you say. And they were actually a medical software company, but they had developed their own internal OKR tool, which I had nothing to compare it against at that point. And so I thought it was great. But actually, when I look at it now, it was bloody awful. Anyway. And they had designs on taking this internal tool to market and selling it on a SaaS basis. And they picked up my paper and said, we quite like your thinking, quite like what you're saying. Would you like to be our UK launch partner? Oh, and by the way, here's $10,000 to go and do some marketing. And we're going to send you this guy who's going to train you. Okay, all right, sounds fantastic. Of course, I'm up for it. And also, I was working with yourself and, your peers in the Manchester tech community at that point. So I kind of had a captive audience that, obviously with their consent, I could start to try and use OKRs. Because what had also, I should just say that I'd observed, was that the work that I'd been doing around sort of business planning and so on, that I'd been doing with leadership teams, was fine up to a point, but usually within about 3 months, in other words, once it had come into contact with reality, most of it had fallen by the wayside. And that was frustrating for them, but it was also frustrating for me because I felt like, what's the point? It was a bit of a wasted effort. So that was another driver for me wanting to find a better way of doing all this.
Yeah.
Anyway, so they sent across this guy who turned out to be one of the world's leading experts in OKRs, which back in 2016 was still pretty damn niche.
Yeah.
This guy had been at Harvard, and he'd worked on developing the balanced scorecard with Kaplan and Norton when that was. So he'd been into business performance and business performance measurement for yonks. So unsurprisingly, he was at the sharp end of the wedge, so to speak, on all this. And he basically said to me, he said, "Look, I can really see the potential here. You are welcome. Here is all my materials. Right, here are all my ways of working and all my tools and all my methods. I want to help you build a consultancy here." So he kind of went further than just training me on the software. He became a mentor for me. To be honest. And that was an absolute catapult for me. It really was. And I'm still in touch with him. I still speak to him every few months. Sometimes we find ourselves bidding against each other.
So what?
The young Padawan has risen up to challenge the master, so to speak.
in terms of OKRs, just for people
Mm.
watching or listening, could
Yeah.
you give it like a summary of what an OKR is?
Yeah, well, of course. Sorry, we've been using the term and with the jargon, we haven't explained it. Yeah, so objectives and key results are, on the face of it, they just look like a different way of writing a goal. Most people probably would have heard of the SMART format for goal writing. OKRs is a different format, but what comes with it is a whole collection of principles and practices which actually make it a very different way of working. You do it if you choose to follow those principles and practices. Some don't, and then get surprised that things don't change. So it's a very collaborative way of working. It's a very transparent way of working. It's a very team focused. So whereas objectives historically have been very much used on an individual basis, this is very much about the team being the unit of work and being the measure of performance, if you will, or the delivery of performance. And there's very strong accountability in it as well, even though that's often the criticism of team performance approaches, because it's like, where's the accountability? Because if someone doesn't pull the weight, then it falls on everybody else. Well, actually, no. In the way that this is structured, and I won't go into the technicalities here and now, but in the way that OKRs are structured, there is still, even though it's on a team basis, there's still individual accountability written into it. That kind of gives you a nice balance of having that team focus, but with people still taking that responsibility for doing what is their name is against. And it's also not a typical sort of cascade approach to, we've got a company level goal here, so so leaders goals here, managers goals here, teams goals here, so they all kind of flow down like a waterfall cascade. I absolutely bloody hate the term cascade. I really do, because it just implies that it flows down to you whether you like it or not.
Yeah,
It's done to you. It's
yeah,
not done. It's not done with you. And so that's 100% top down. With OKRs, certainly with the way that we take our clients through them, it's very much about a 50-50. So the 50% top down is about setting the strategic direction and the challenge for the organization. And then the 50% bottom up is how we solve those challenges, and then the progress that we make towards them. And we find that is that the wider organization responds far, far more positively to that
hmm
than the historical, well, let's just let it all cascade through the organization and everybody then knows what they need to do. Well, they might well know it, but are they really bought into it? Question, probably not.
yeah. And the bit that I like always loved, I like how you mentioned the individual element, because that kind of was what struck me with them early doors. And yeah, sure, we kind of work with them in the company across, from individual, team, department, all of that. But I like the fact that you had like, you talk about accountability. You had like the objective, which can be kind of like aspirational, if you like, and you can hold it in your head. But then you've got the measurable key results, which I love that part of it. I love the fact
Yeah,
that you can check into them once a week or check into them once a month. That I like that form of accountability and routine and structure. But I also like the fact that the objective, the way I still use them today, and I still like how I can hold the objective in my head, and I don't have to use loads and loads of lengthy words to
exactly.
make it measurable. I just know I've got me outcome, if you like, or my objective, and then measurable key results. And I sometimes like them. The key result can be done or not done, or 0 to 100%. I like the different ways to measure as well. I've always found that quite useful.
Yeah, you have to get your head around metrics when you use a key result, because there are lots of different metrics, and a skill is learning which metrics to use in the right scenarios. But that all comes with practice. And you also mentioned about the routine of check-in. That's the other thing that makes them different to how objectives and goals have been used previously, is that you're right in saying that when you get, not so much at company level, but when you start to get into sort of 3-month OKRs, quarterly OKRs, which are often a typical time frame for them, the teams that are working on those would probably be checking in only for 20 minutes or so, but at least once a fortnight. They're scoring their progress and they're scoring their confidence around still hitting that by the end of the quarter, and that massively raises them into that front of mind. So that you don't then have the risk of, like I said, the plan is done and then 3 months later it's forgotten about. This is what keeps it current, and it helps to. The other thing that we see is that this level of empowerment, this level of transparency means that when teams are faced with making decisions on the fly, they can do that in the knowledge of what the priorities are. They don't need to refer up. They don't need to go and, well, we better check this. We better check that we understand it. They already know what the priorities are. So we actually see agility, and absolutely primarily we see speed of execution improve. And typically we see clients that previously took 12 months to achieve their goals, achieving them in half that time with this. So it really is acceleration of outcome.
Yeah, I don't know if it's still termed this way, but I'll still use it this way if you like. The check-in, I've always liked on track, off track. I like that just in a simple statement. And through my use of them over the years, I like that if the culture's right in the company and you feel safe to go off track, it's a nice little measure to just for somebody to come to you with a bit of support as well. And I like that because not everything it doesn't. It's not. They're not always on track, right?
No. Exactly.
Fine.
Exactly.
Hand up. Here's the context. Here's a check-in. It's off track, and the support can. I like that part of it. The on track, off track. Really, really useful.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, because it becomes your early warning system. And you've got a fighting chance of course correcting if something is off track and people are being open and honest about it. But that is a big cultural shift for a lot of organizations who have perhaps, not been that great at being, transparent around status. And also, if people have come from organizations like that and are in one that is transparent now, it can still take them time to get comfortable with that because they've been used to a kicking if they give bad news. So there is that. It takes time. You can't necessarily just expect that to be in place right from the word go. But the best thing to get that, to really validate it, is for the leadership to be transparent about it. And transparent about the things which they have perhaps they're missing on, and that it aren't 100% on track, and that really validates it. It doesn't. I mean, I don't get me wrong. It's not about validating that people should take the foot off the gas and it's fine if this and so on and so forth. Of course, it isn't about that. It isn't about in the slightest. But if there are genuine reasons as to why things are off track, then yeah, it should be there for everyone to see.
It's funny because we had a little snippet of a podcast with Lucy Massett, who has gone from out of university into full-time employment. We released just a little clip on TikTok 2 weeks ago, and all it was about how to retain, how to attract and retain talent, right? And all she said was so simple, but it linked to the check-in system. She said, if I put my hand up in a company and I feel safe to do so, I'm in the right place. If I make a mistake and I put my hand up and I get berated, I'm not in the right place. It's quite simple. And you know what? It's our second most viewed post, and that tells you something. It's like the younger generation coming through are really well informed. And I think that the culture of a company does need to be worked on to make people feel comfortable in the environment they're in.
Definitely.
People make mistakes.
Psychological safety is something that we actively work on with clients now.
Yes.
And it is really important. We can actually, we're trained up in tools that we can use to actually measure the level of psychological safety that's present in teams and in wider organizations. And it's really, really valuable to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One quick topic, because I want to talk a bit more about their vaginas, but just touch on very the emotional intelligence, because that's one of my main favourites. Can you explain to people what is meant by emotional intelligence?
Yeah, so this was what I really focused on in my early days of coaching, because to me, I remember reading a paper just in my last few years of my time at Fujitsu, and it was an extract from a book called Primal Leadership. I was on the train to London one morning, and I swear the rest of the carriage saw this big light bulb go on above my head, because I was like, oh my God, that's why I do what I do when I'm in those situations. emotional intelligence is about awareness of self and awareness of others. So if you imagine it as a matrix, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you basically, it's about how well you understand yourself. And then once you understand that, the decisions that you make to manage yourself. And it's about how well you understand others and then your impact on others. Okay. So for me, it was like that. It moved me from that unconscious sort of reactive space when I was faced with pressure and stress and so on and so forth to understanding what was triggering me, to then being able to better spot the signals
Mm-hmm.
and being able to develop simple techniques just to kind of take the steam out of the situation. And that could be simple as taking a pause, having a breath,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. It's something. It's something that when you introduced it to me, I was very conscious of it. Then is it? Is it? It was the difference between IQ and is it EQ?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So it's not like I sat down with each new candidate and really tried to analyze their EQ because it was hard to do, but I had an awareness of it, right? And there's a few people. Well, I won't name here, but there's a few people that did really well at my agency, and they had really good EQ. You could just tell, and it was particularly useful around client calls and stressful times and things like that. And some of these people didn't have like a great, like a massive CV of qualifications and everything else. They had skills, obviously, but quite a few we got into the agency, and they had a really good level of emotional intelligence, and they thrived.
Absolutely.
They learned so quick. I mean, I will name one because I'm embarrassed. But Sam Shepard came in, and he wanted to learn more about SEO. And within about 4 months, he was doing the agency SEO, and we were an SEO agency. But it was just phenomenal. But it's always been something that I like to learn things, as you know. But then it was so applicable to your personal life as well. It benefits both. So and you were the one that introduced me to it. And I remember you telling me that story of how you came across it in the books and all this other stuff, the study you were doing. And I remember you doing a talk at the agency about it. And I know to this day, there's some of the people that we worked with and that you coached that have gone on to like really high end jobs. Some have got their own agencies. Some are
Great.
like HR directors, and it planted that seed with emotional intelligence. But just coming back to There Be Giants, because I want to get on to a bit more of your story. So, can you just tell me the roles you've kind of gone through and where you're at today with There Be Giants?
Yeah, so there's a number of sort of gear changes that the business has had throughout the years. As you said, you can I can trace the business back to January 2010. Give or take a week or two, it's nearly 15 years, and I was working by myself up until about 2016, and then I had somebody join me who stuck with me for a couple of years, but that person also brought a third person into the business. The third person remained with me. That's Lawrence. And he kind of joined me as a junior consultant to start off with, just sort of riding side saddle on projects with me. And the other person left the business. So come to sort of 2018, I suppose, we were really starting to pick up a real sort of head of steam on all the OKR work. We were one of the first in the UK and amongst just a handful in Europe that were working in that space at that time. So it was easy. As long as we got the SEO right, it was easy to get seen.
Yeah, yeah.
And within less than 12 months, we were working all over the world. We even ended up in 2019. We even ended up working in bloody Jamaica with the British Caribbean Insurance Company.
Wow.
And then we picked up a client in Switzerland, did a lot of work with them. We picked up work with University of it wasn't University of Auckland at that point. It was a division of Auckland, the government in Auckland, actually. And so we went out there, and we were out there just as COVID was kicking off. And you sat there at whatever time it was, 3 o'clock in the morning, their time, watching Boris at the podium, going, "Yeah, we it's not looking good, everyone. And we're thinking, Christ, are we actually going to be able to get back in the country? And I got back into the UK about 3 days before lockdown finished. Lockdown started, beg your pardon. And by that point, there was in the business, there was me and Lawrence. There's always been Jill, who's kind of like the office manager who holds us all together. And we also had someone from an agency, but she was really embedded with us, who was doing our marketing as well at that point. And like every business owner, I'm sure at the beginning of COVID, you're thinking, Christ, am I going to have a business at the end of all this?
Yeah.
But it was, in many respects, actually, it was another gear change for us, because what suddenly happened was that we had much larger organisations that came knocking on our door, because they suddenly had remote teams, and they didn't have the tools or the management processes, models, methods, whatever, to be able to kind of still keep them focused, still give them something to coalesce around and really keep their momentum up. And lo and behold, OKRs were really good for that. So, we found ourselves working with the likes of ITV and TalkTalk, and also, I mean, those are obviously UK examples, but also picking up still work overseas. We did more work in New Zealand. We did work in South Africa. We did work for the largest commercial bank in Argentina as well at that point, that was going through a big agile transformation as well. This was all remote. It was all 100% remote.
Yeah.
And so consequently, by the time we got to the end of 20, our financial year runs up to March 31st, so I would say 31st of March 21, we were like, Christ, we've kind of almost doubled in size in 12 months. This is crazy. So we looked at expanding and bringing in we decided to bring in a sales director, and we brought in a couple of new junior consultants as well. Things continued okay for the next 12 months, but they didn't exactly go as planned. And from a business point of view, I'm not really sure that the sales director appointment worked out for us. He's a great guy, and I'd give him a great reference in wherever he went. But the kind of, sales is like anything, like running a business full stop. It's almost like walking into a casino and placing your chips down on the table and hoping that your bets come up. And some of the bets that he, with our consent, he wasn't going off and doing things without us knowing. They didn't come off. However, he did get us our partnership with Microsoft, which has had mixed success. It's not been the stellar partnership that we'd hoped for, but we have definitely seen some benefit from it. And whilst all that was going on, moved into the chairman role, because I had I wanted to kind of expand my role beyond the business, or what I do beyond the business, and maybe start picking up some non-exec work and so on and so forth. But I've got to be honest, we actually contracted a little bit. We had to let a couple of the consultants go. We let the sales director go, but we kind of refocused ourselves back to where we are now. And whilst my title is still chairman, I should have said Lawrence has actually been managing director since late 2020 as well. So in terms of the running of the business, he's very much all over that. And he does a really good job with it. So I came back into the business and got very hands-on with our largest and most complex client that we started working with. Where are we? This is 24, back in the middle of early 23, really. And I've led with them ever since. And I've still picked up other clients as well, but that's been my main point of engagement. So I'm kind of like senior consultant for the business, which is fine. But it all worked out in such a way, because at that point I say at that point, right from the point of 2020, I started to have quite a few personal health challenges myself. So this kind of this kind of restructuring of the business and sort of transfer of responsibility was something that I very much needed at that time. But it's worked out well for everyone.
Really. And can you touch on a little bit about like what you're comfortable sharing, like the challenges? Did they come? Was the pandemic a part of that? Was that was the length of time you've been in business? Was it the combination of everything?
Well, funnily enough, the pandemic nearly killed me, but it wasn't COVID that nearly killed me. I never actually got COVID until the end of 21,
Mm,
actually.
mm,
And ironically, I brought it home with me from hospital. But no, when I was in New Zealand,
mm,
the very last day we'd been working with the client, and we'd had an absolutely fantastic week. And so Lawrence and I are kind of like, oh, we need to go for beers. And lovely harbourfront down in Auckland, and he says, like, I know the perfect bar. I'm going straight there. I said, all right, I'm going back to the apartment. I'm just going to freshen up a bit. And he'd been saying to me, oh, you need to use these electric scooters. They're brilliant. You just, you might have seen them. You scan them on. I think they use the Uber app out there. Actually, you scan it on the Uber app. It unlocks it, and off you trot. So there's me thinking, oh, right, okay, I might give one of these a go because this bar was about a 20-minute walk away, and I picked one. I picked one in a quiet car park so I could have a little practice run. So I unlock it and I get on it, and I don't know whether I probably shouldn't have done this, but my instinct was to push off with my foot when I was on it, and as I pushed with my left foot, there was the loudest crack you've ever heard. I was convinced I'd broken something. I'd broken a bone. And it was so loud that someone stood about 10 foot away from me had heard it. And yeah, needless to say, I didn't use a scooter. I managed to hobble to this bar, by which point, apparently, I walked in and I was faced like a sheet, like white sheet. And after a pint, which didn't really help me feel any better, I thought I'm gonna have to go to hospital. So there's me on a Friday night in Auckland, ending up in A&E, and they X-ray it and they say you've not broken any bones, but clearly because I literally crawled in on my hands and knees into A&E, and they said clearly something's not right. We're going to strap you up, and they put me in a boot and gave me some crutches, and they said, right, here's some aspirin, take that on the flight home so that you look after yourself and so on and so forth. Right, okay, fine, because I was about 2 days from leaving by this point. And the following day we were going on a tour around some vineyards, so I still managed to go on that though, even though I was hobbling around. Yeah. Anyway, so I get to fly home. I think it was on the Monday or the Tuesday, something like that. And I get back here, and like I say, this was like I think I got back into the UK on the Thursday, and the following Monday lockdown started. And after a period of about a week, I started to get short of breath, and I have asthma, so I know what that feels like. And it wasn't a tightness of chest. What it was like was, when you get a stitch, yeah. But obviously, after 15, 20 seconds, that goes. It was like a stitch that wouldn't go. And I'd get this when I would be out on my regular dog walk, which is as flat as anything. There's no, real sort of steep climbs or anything. It's not like me to be getting out of breath or feeling pain or anything like that. And it got to a point where I was actually struggling to sleep lying down. I had to prop myself up, and I spoke to the doctors. You can go to the doctors at this point. I called the doctors, and they were like, as soon as they'd heard that I'd been in New Zealand or overseas, they were like, "Oh, you've got COVID," because there were no tests at this point. You see, "Oh, you've got COVID. You can't. Don't come in. Don't come in. Just isolate, isolate, isolate." Four times. I tried to contact doctors to get over a period of about the following week. Four times I tried to get something from someone, and they said, "Oh, you've got pleurisy, you've got a lung infection, something like that." Eventually, I had a call with a GP who went, "Hang on a second, you've had," and by the way, I'd managed to get an MRI scan done by this point, and they found out I'd snapped a tendon in my foot. Not my Achilles. It's the one that makes your foot. It was the one that makes your foot go from side to side, not up and down. Okay.
yeah. Still painful.
So he went, "You've had a lower limb injury. You've flown back from New Zealand, and now you're short of breath." Honestly, when I was talking to him, I couldn't get to the end of a sentence. I was struggling to breathe. It was so effing painful to actually breathe. I was trying my best not to breathe. It
Mm.
was that bad. And he said, "You've got. I think you've got a pulmonary embolism. You need to get yourself to A&E immediately." So I was on a team call at that point, and I was like, I need to phone an ambulance." They're all like, "Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god!" I get to hospital and, it's the height of COVID. This is kind of mid to late April in 2020. And they say, right, okay, they do the scans and they say, right, you have massive PEs on both sides of your lungs. You probably had about 2 hours left.
Bloody hell.
Yeah.
2 hours?
About 2 hours. And they managed to use the anticoagulants and stuff to start to get me down, but they wanted to put me onto a bloody COVID ward, for fuck's sake. And I was like, I refused to. I insisted on them letting me home because, COVID, we all were hearing at that point, was going straight to your lungs. And I was like, really? Seriously? And consequently, because it got so far, I've got permanent lung damage now, so I haven't got the lung capacity that I used to have. So that was, by the way, it took me till the following January to actually get my foot repaired because there was everything had been, all that sort of elective surgery had obviously just been pulled because of COVID. So that was that. Okay. Then you kind of go forward to 21, which is when things were starting to slowly open up and so on. And in the summer of 21, my father needed to go into hospital for an operation. My father's, at that point, was, 83, 84, 82, 83. My mum's got dementia as well. Not to the extent where she doesn't recognise you, but you'll have the same conversation 3 or 4 times when you go to see her. And I don't have any brothers or sisters, so all the support falls to me, which is fine. I'm comfortable with that. But it turned into, basically, Dad's operation screwed up, and what should have been just one night in hospital turned out to be 5 weeks. And suddenly, I'm having to provide care for Mum and still trying to run the business and so on and so forth. And it turned into a bit of a nightmare scenario. She was really struggling to understand all this and was fighting against it. And it was a horrendous time and really confusing for her as well. Yeah, I used to think it was a Hollywood trope of movies that they kind of rolled out when it was convenient to do so, that, it kind of, at some point in life, certain memories from childhood kind of come back to you and kind of hit you like a train or whatever. Throughout, without going into a huge amount of details, there was a lot that came out in that period that made me realise that actually I had experienced quite a lot of abuse when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to understand that, and without feeling like I could talk to either of my parents about it, because in many respects they'd feel very guilty because, well, partly with the cause of it, partly didn't protect me from it, and so on. So, and it just wouldn't serve anything, sharing it with them and, them becoming, in many respects, I'd probably feel like I'd have to manage them through it. And I just didn't have the emotional capacity to do that at that point in time. And I got very, very close to having a full breakdown, to be perfectly honest, by the end of this period. This was like end of August.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of burgeoning relationship that I'd been involved with had just suddenly disappeared as well, which didn't help matters. I can remember, actually, I speak to you from my home office study. I can remember being sat over there just thinking, do you know what, actually? So I'll tell you what the tipping point was. I kind of went back to something which I had promised to myself when I was 15 years old. See, because my father actually, mental health does run in the family, or challenges with mental health. And he had a full-on breakdown when he was 15 and he was hospitalized and so on. So I was no stranger to it and didn't have any, any hang-ups, any phobias or anything. There were no, it wasn't, oh, you should never talk about it or should be embarrassed about it. We've always kind of had, I suppose, a bit of a healthy sort of open approach to it. But he had a full-on breakdown, and I witnessed what he went through. And I remember saying to myself, I am never going to let anything get me to that point because it's just not worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of like a slap across the face to me, because it was kind of like this younger me was there saying it to the older me.
Yeah.
And because the younger me could see that the older me was about to really fall off the edge.
Yeah.
And so I started this. I made a few decisions. I decided, right, I'm going down to a 4-day week.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to, like most people over COVID, you kind of lose track of fitness and going to the gym and this, that, and the other. And I'd got some kit at home, and I was trying to fool myself that I was doing enough using it at home and so on and so forth. But yeah, all right. Yeah, barely scratching the surface, really. So I went and joined the local CrossFit gym because I used to do that years ago, and I thought it'd be really good to get back into that. So I started with that, treated myself to a nice new big TV and that's, a few things just to kind of try and rebuild and sort of make myself feel a bit better. And I also started working with a therapist as well. I wasn't just expecting all those nice things to solve the problem. It was kind of, I was looking at it from all angles. And so for a few months I was making good progress. And then come the end of November, I was out, I'd had a lovely week off, gone up to the Lake District as I often do with the dogs. And I'd come back and I was walking the dogs on Sunday afternoon, just on the regular dog walk. And I slip on this little muddy patch. And this little muddy patch was a very, very small incline. And I went down like a sack of spuds, and I knew exactly what had happened. I tore my quadricep away from my kneecap.
Ow.
And my kneecap was like partway down my shin. Yeah, so no chance of walking. Absolutely no chance of walking. So 2 ambulance crews later, because I was actually on a little footpath by the river. So there weren't any roads that were I wasn't on a pavement as such. So they had to walk quite a distance with the stretchers and stuff to get to me. And I ended up being in hospital for 6 weeks. And that was when Lawrence took the reins of the business. Because it'd always been the plan that he would. We'd always talked about that he would kind of slip in behind me. But I said, now's your chance, mate, if you want to. So he did, and he did a really good job. And it just seemed a bit daft when I came back to go, thanks very much, I'm going to take it all back off you now, which was why he's continued with it.
Yeah, of course.
So I end up in hospital, and they operate within a few days to sew it all back together. I've got pictures of what my knee looked like, and it looked like, honestly, it was the size of a football. It was massive, absolutely massive. So I was literally having to learn how to walk again. But I was having to be lifted in and out of bed. I couldn't bend my leg. I wasn't allowed to bend my knee at all, and it's just it's funny actually, because how social media likes to remind you of posts from this day a few years ago. I'm getting all these ones from 3 years ago. You were in hospital and you were saying this, and you were Jesus Christ, really. So yeah, so I was kind of it got to a point where it looked like I was kind of well enough clinically, I was well enough to perhaps be discharged, but I wasn't physically capable of looking after myself at home. I couldn't manage stairs or anything like that. Initially, get this, they wanted to discharge me to a nursing home.
I mean, why? Why would?
Because the idea was that I'd be looked after there, and the community physios could go in and see me there.
Right. Okay.
And I fought against this absolutely tooth and nail. And I got a space on. I was in Salford Royal, which, as you may know, is arguably one of the best hospitals in the Northwest, let alone Greater Manchester. And they have an absolutely fantastic intermediate care unit there, which had only just been built. It had been open less than 12 months. And it's like a 50-bed unit where people go who were in my situation and, clinically okay, physically still not quite there. They've got loads of physios on site, fantastic facilities, and it's like a blueprint for what these units are going to be like across the rest of the NHS. And I was like, I want to go in there. What's the problem? And eventually they said, yeah, all right. If you wait till next Wednesday, you can have a bed in there. Great. Problem was, the Monday beforehand, I collapsed. And I collapsed because I had another blood clot, which was this time right behind my heart. And even though they had done everything, there was no negligence in this. I was having all the right medication post-surgery, getting the daily injections and all this, that, and the other. I was that 1 in a million that it just wasn't quite enough for. And when they scanned me, they found that I had this huge blood clot. And I remember the doctor coming to me came to me about 1 o'clock in the morning, and he said, "Right, mate, I'd only come and see people at this time of night if it's not good news."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Okay, all right, that's great."
Yeah.
And he said, "To be honest, I'm surprised you're still alive." He said, "We've got to get you into intensive care immediately."
Right.
He said, "Because you are at imminent risk of heart failure."
Right.
He said, he said to me, "Have you done a lot of sport and fitness in your time?" I said, "Yeah, I used to row. I'm still trying to keep myself active." He said, "That's probably saving your life at the moment," because he said that, the at that point I was, what, 49, I think I was. He said the average 49-year-old would not survive what the pressure that your heart is being put under at this moment in time. And so I was taken onto intensive care, and he said, well, actually before that, he said to me, he said, "Look, I need to talk you through something, because I need to get your consent in advance in case we have to do it, because we won't have time to discuss it if we need it." And he said, "If your systolic blood pressure drops below 100, he said, the only option we have at that point to try and bring it back up, to try and help, is to thrombolyze you with clot busting drugs." And he said, "Whilst that sounds like a really good thing," he said, "there's so much risk with it, because you've just had surgery. So there's a very good chance you could end up bleeding out."
Yeah.
He said, "If there's anything brain-wise that could be slightly weak," he said, "it can cause bleeds on the brain and you can end up having a stroke." And he said, "If I'm honest," he said, "at the moment, I'd reckon you've got a 50-50 chance of needing it. And if you have it, then I think you've got a 50-50 chance of it being a good outcome."
And is that at this point, even just at this point, you've had all this go on, it's like bang, 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 one thing. It's remarkable you're still here, to be perfectly honest with you. But is there something, when you're going through all of that, was there, as you know, I've had, a difficult 5 years, but
Yeah.
with your story, was there any, with me, like the odd thing would pull me through it and just ease it a little bit. And I had this affinity with like quotes and things like that. I've learnt loads in my career, like you've learnt loads in your career, right? About physical health, mental health, business, life, all of this. But was there anything that helped you pull through it a little bit, or did you just keep going?
It's very, I mean, for listeners, you know this, Dave, but for the benefit of listeners, I don't have a family of my own. I don't have kids. So it's not, I can't sit here and say it's for the kids,
Yeah,
or it's for my other half.
yeah,
But kind of in the same vein, what I will say is it was the dogs.
yeah, yeah,
It's the dogs. The dogs were my anchor.
yeah.
The dogs
I
were
mean,
my anchor.
I talk about the hospital, and I'll touch on briefly because this relates to a dog. And my daughter was going through; she's doing really well now, touch wood, but she was going through her own experience, and she was in surgery one. Well, she had a few surgeries, but one in particular, my thing is I'd go and have a walk, right? And these are like 12-hour surgeries, and I walked, and I was just like barely holding things together. But I saw this guy outside Manchester Children's Hospital just sat on a bench, and he just looked sad, and he looked hurt, and every other emotion. And I just looked at him and thought, he looks like how I feel. And I just sat next to him, didn't say anything. Just must have been sat there for about 10 minutes. And eventually he opened up and he just said his dog had died. And I felt his pain. Like, sometimes when people have a story, you don't need to have a poorly child to feel like how I did. His dog had died, and I just 100% believed he's allowed to feel how I feel. But brain's the brain. You process things the way you process them. You feel things how you feel. But there's been moments like that. But that one always stands out to me. So I fully understand what you mean by your dogs. Any form of purpose that pulls you through it, really. But yeah, you've all dogs, haven't you?
Yeah, yeah, they have been my anchors in life. And yeah, I owe them so much. Even though they cost me a small fortune, I owe them so much.
Yeah. There's another like quick one that helped me, and it reminds me a bit of your story in a way. But in and around the hospital, there'd be like quotes on walls and stuff, and but I always see them. This one, I think it's a John Lennon quote, but it was like, "It'll be okay in the end, and if it's not okay, it's not the
It's
end."
not the
But then I kept going, well, when is it the end of? Because things keep hitting. You're like, your
like
story, yeah,
it's like the one that Tom Hanks always says, which this too shall pass.
yeah,
So I ended up. So that was the dog walk was at the end of November. I got home on Christmas Eve. I ended up being discharged to an absolutely fantastic facility in Sheffield, which was my medical insurance actually paid for me to go to a rehab facility, and it was an amazing place where there was like physio, hydrotherapy, like every single day, and I'd spent the whole week kind of building up my strength, tackling stairs and this, that, and the other, and learning how to, or making sure I could dress myself and all that kind of thing. And I came home on Christmas Eve, and yeah, and I was off work for about 6 months. I went back sort of mid to late May the following year because, as to be honest, I mean, my head, even though physically, I was healing, my head needed to heal as well because
yeah,
of, I mean, I believe this is true that the kind of stress and trauma manifests itself physically, and one wonders, all right, there was a distinct slip, but
yeah,
it's just kind of, after the real trauma that I, arguably delayed trauma, that I felt during the summer, and trying to kind of pull myself back from the brink and trying to rebuild myself, and then having that again,
yeah,
you kind of wonder, yeah,
yeah,
was that just everything suddenly going and just suddenly snapping?
yeah,
Was that it?
yeah,
Was that the way of life giving me the space that I needed to kind of rebuild myself? And what I did during that period, I got, again, my medical insurance gave me quite a decent payout for the time I've been in hospital, which was very nice. I managed to use that to go on a really intensive therapeutic retreat down in Dorset on the island of Portland, just down there. And it because what I didn't want was to go, whilst I was off and I had the time to invest in it, what I didn't want was something that I just did an hour a week. I wanted to kind of go somewhere, switch my phone off, and absolutely throw myself into it. And that's what this incredible woman does. And she kind of has, one person that comes and stays with her for a week, and she takes care of everything. She'll feed you, she'll even do your washing, and all that she asks is you turn up in that beautiful attic space that she has for doing the work on, between 10 and 12 and 2 and 4, and you work hard. And that was that was what I needed, and that helped me
mm,
get my head around kind of all the shit that had happened and had come out and had happened since that period. So that was definitely worth it. That was definitely worth it. And that was, sorry, I was just going to say that took us to 20. That was 22.
mm,
Where the business was around that point was we were kind of starting to kind of contract back to just sort of focusing on our core market, and then 23, the big account came along, and I've focused on that ever since. The final thing, I'll shut up in a minute, but the final thing, which I think is probably worth sharing, is what happened for me earlier this year. Fortunately, no trips to hospital this time, no near death experiences, but I got to about, where was it? It was about March time, and I'd been struggling for about the past 5 years with an increasing sense of just brain fog, right? Being able to just read words on a screen or on a page, make sense of them, do some analysis, just be able to kind of absorb that and think something through logically. I honestly felt like my faculties were just leaving me, and my confidence was dropping massively. Um I'd actually put quite a bit of weight on by this point as well, which wasn't helping matters. And I decided I was doing quite a bit of reading around what could be causing this. And I decided to have a blood test for low testosterone. And it turned out that mine was absolutely rock bottom. And I went to see the doctor, and what the NHS considers to be low testosterone is they set their threshold a lot higher than kind of like the rest of the medical profession, because obviously they bring it low down, then that opens the floodgates for everybody getting treatment. And to be fair, my GP really tried his best, really tried his best to get me treatment. But he said, I can refer you to a private clinic, but I just can't get you anything on the NHS. Anyway, so I found this great clinic, which I've been under the treatment of since then, and I started on TRT back at the end of March, and I take 3 very small subcutaneous injections a week, and my God, within 48 hours the difference was incredible.
Really?
Absolutely transformational. The clarity returned, the sense of, and just the sense of confidence and the sense of well-being. Just it was massive. It was really massive. And with this clinic, I have to have regular blood tests, and it's all monitored and everything, and we've seen it build back up to sort of normal levels. And genuinely I genuinely believe that a lot of what the NHS treats as through antidepressants, actually for men, actually of my age, are down to hormone deficiencies. Now, the cause for that is, well, who knows? I even heard last week on the news that the female pill is to blame for it, because apparently they're peeing out lots of estrogen, which is getting into the water supply and reducing male testosterone, which I'm not sure I necessarily subscribe to myself. I think I'm probably more towards believing that the levels of pollution every day or something like that is probably having more of an effect than anything else.
Yeah, interesting.
But irrespective, I can't change the levels of pollution in this area, so I've got to find a way of dealing with it. And I found a way of dealing with it, and it was absolutely transformational. And I mentioned I was overweight as well at the time, but being the height that I am, I carry it quite well. So people would look at me and go, "You don't look overweight," I knew I was.
But you feel it, don't you?
Yeah. And also because, as I explained, my knees are not great, especially after what I did to one of them, and also the amount of squash I've played over the years, and just my knees are just generally worn out now anyway. The extra weight doesn't help the joints. So I decided to go on to Mounjaro, which is one of the weight loss drugs. And I was on a program. It wasn't just the medication, because I thought I need something more than that. And I went onto this program that had coaching built into it, and it was all about behavior and habit change whilst you were on the medication. So you kind of, if you think of the medication as a circuit breaker, so it kind of removes that level of it. Well, it suppresses the appetite to a large degree. That's what it does, and it does it really successfully, and allows you to not to be kind of free of those urges to raid the fridge at night and all this, that, and the other. And it's whilst at the same time, they're kind of coaching you through, well, you've got a one-to-one coach. You're in a cohort of other people that are on it. They send you a set of scales which only synchronize with their app, so they know what you're weighing, so they're watching you. But the most useful thing was the recipe book that they sent, and there were so many dead easy, really useful recipes which you could batch cook and freeze and sort of make, eat on a day by day basis. And it changed the way, because I wasn't having a fry up every day, but I didn't realize how much of the processed foods I was eating.
Yeah.
And that was the thing that wasn't doing me any good. And I was on it for 5 months, and I came off it in August, and I was a little bit worried, because I thought, "Oh crikey, am I going to start put weight back on?" But I'd continued with the changes that I'd made. I've continued with those, and I've actually still lost more weight since then. So overall, I've lost over 2 stone since my. And that's the thing. It's the circuit breaker. It's not a long term fix.
Yeah.
It's the circuit breaker to help you change the habits.
Yeah. I can see that. Interesting that you bring that up about the different opportunities are supposed to take. What was it? TRT. Yeah,
That's right. Yeah.
as well, because I suppose with everything you've been through, like you say this, right, you just need something. You can't fix everything at once, right? But you need something to help you just make, change your trajectory, if you like, in a slightly different direction. And that's something I've learned in the last 5 years. It could be a person, could be a conversation, could be medication, could be therapy, could be something, but it's not that it's going to make things 100% better, but it might just open the door of like 0.5%, and that over the course of a day, a week, months, a year, it becomes more of a substantial gain. And so for me, I feel like even listening to you now, I've found it helpful as well when telling my story to other people or listening to their stories. Like sometimes people just need someone to listen, and that it's just a percentage. It just opens the door a little bit for somebody, or it could be a smile at somebody that's walking down the street, just slightly different. Gives them the opportunity to have a slightly better day. Say hello to the security guard. But it's the same with medication. It's the same with supplement. I think it's whatever is going to help you that tiny little bit. It breaks way into other opportunities, doesn't it?
Yeah, the TRT, and so many people that know me have said this to me. They said it's got me back to my old self.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
what it's done. That's what
yeah,
it's done.
yeah. I mean, it's a remarkable story. I mean, I knew bits of it, but not to that detail. So it's and here's one to end on, because it's something I still think about. But up to your life now and your story to this point today,
Mm.
and I don't even think there's a right or wrong answer. I think it's just personal to everybody. When you look back at your story in your life, would you change it, or do you think it shouldn't be changed, and that's what makes you you?
Oh, that's a really good question. There are decisions that I've made along the way, which, yeah, with the benefit of hindsight, I suppose I might have made a slightly different choice. Am I happy with where things are at? On the whole, yes. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because to say this may sound like I'm kind of contradicting, my principles, because the business is, business is a goal setting business. I never actually had a big hairy goal when I set the business up. I was so sick to death of working in corporate. All I wanted to do was just earn enough to pay the bills and enjoy the work I do. And eventually, when I feel like I've got consistent income, get a dog. Those are the three things. But you climb that hill, that first hill, and then when you get to the top of that, you can see beyond to the next one, which is a bit higher. And so you think, oh, that one looks interesting. So you then climb that one, and then next one, look, right, yeah, that one looks really interesting. So, and if you draw a line that connects all the summits, you realise actually you've been going up and up and up and up and up, even though it's been a bit like that. So I never expected to be running, like an international consultancy and so on. Now I feel very lucky. I feel very lucky because, it affords me a degree of flexibility, a degree of autonomy. I have an absolutely fantastic team who I think are just I love the work that they do, and I'm just eternal for the commitment that they show. And, especially as we're all home based, we don't have an office.
Yeah,
So that's even more of a challenge, I think, because you don't have that real. You have to work even harder, shall I say, to have that connection. So yeah, it's. But to answer your question, I'm happy with how things have changed. Sorry, how things have worked out. Would I have changed? Would I change it all? No. Would I make some would I perhaps have changed some of the decisions that I've made? Yes, but they're not big ones. They're not fundamental ones.
yeah,
Yeah. So I might have taken a different path, I guess.
yes, of course. Well, listen, I think thanks for having coming on the podcast for a start.
My pleasure.
We're definitely due now, because we've both had a bit go on the last few years. We're due a catch up in person. Won't be any scooters or anything in sight. We'll have a brewer behind, no
Yeah.
scooter, and yeah. But no, thanks for your time. As I said at the start, like I've always held you in high regard. My coach back in the day, but I'm also a believer that you can't always put people on a pedestal, like because people have their own stuff go on and people have their own challenges.
Mm.
And it's great to see you coming through them all and getting back to strength, to be honest. But thank you very much for coming on.
No, my pleasure, Dave. It's been great. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. See you later, mate.
Take care.